We're now starting, and the theme is Investing Today for a Safer Tomorrow, Increasing Investment in Local Action. Our discussion this afternoon is vitally important. It will be moderated by Ms. Zainab Badawi, international broadcaster and journalist, and presenter of the BBC World News and BBC Hard Talk. Ms. Badawi, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Your Excellencies, Secretary General, Deputy Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I would like you, if you would be so kind as to sit down, please, because we are running short of time, and thank you. Could you put it louder? Yes. Thank you very much indeed. Now, the Secretary-General has to go to a press conference immediately. So before I introduce our panel, Secretary-General, thank you very much. We were all listening to what you had to say at the beginning of this session, and very interested. But I just wondered whether you could clarify a couple of things for us. And really, I've got one question for you with two elements to it. When you say that you want action taken at the local level, what are the urgent steps, the urgent tasks that you want local government to carry out? And of course, you know, there are many other stakeholders involved in disaster risk reduction, the private sector. So what do other stakeholders need to do? Secretary General.
Thank you very much, Ms. Badawi, for moderating this important debate. I'd like to highlight just three things. First of all, conducting risk assessment of critical infrastructures like hospital, public buildings, schools. The primary purpose of this global platform is to seek a target, some specific target, an achievable target of our disaster risk reduction. That's one primary target. Second, raising awareness of the importance of disaster risk reduction. As you may know, in 2008, in Bahrain, I have launched, again, a global campaign, global platform for this disaster risk reduction. I have taken this as one of the 8 priorities of the United Nations for this year. The intervals and frequencies of natural disasters have been much, much more often than we have expected. So there needs to be a strengthened awareness at the levels of leaders, mayors, governors, and business leaders. Then thirdly, we have to, as I said earlier in my remarks, broaden our coalition of actions. In this broadening actions, I believe that the leadership of local government, mayors and governors and county leaders, this will be very much important. And I really count on all of you. You are the one, on the ground, to carry out all these preparations. And I count on your leadership. Thank you.
Secretary General, thank you very much indeed for clarifying that. And I think I understand that you have to go to the press conference. So whenever your aides feel that you need to do that, we understand, Secretary General. Thank you. Right. So now that we have had that clarified, I just want to very briefly welcome you all to this session on disaster risk reduction, mitigation and management, it's actually a subject that I have had many, many centuries of sort of genetic memory experience, because I was born in northern Sudan, and of course all of you will know that Sudan is the land of the two Niles, the Blue Nile and the White Nile. And my family were originally from north of Khartoum, midway between Khartoum and the border with Egypt. And we've always had to contend with the fact that nature gives you many benefits, but it also has many perils. And the floods of the River Nile is something which my ancestors, the Kushites, as they were many, many centuries ago, had to contend with. And if you visit parts of northern Sudan and indeed Egypt, you'll see the Nilometers that they had. So even then, there was disaster risk management. And so it's a great long tradition that we are continuing today, of course, in many different manifestations. But with my modern hat as somebody who works in the media, I think that this is such a opportune time, sadly for tragic reasons, that we are discussing this with perhaps added urgency because of the terrible twin disaster in Japan, the tsunami and the earthquake, something which has attracted a great deal of media attention and perhaps has really concentrated minds on this topic and made us really all aware of the perils that nature has and what we can do. And of course, with the recent earthquake in Christchurch in New Zealand, that also helped to really bring this to the fore. So we're actually going to be having a discussion now, and let me just very quickly introduce our panel members. We're going to be talking, because there are many aspects to this subject, of course, and you've got a long time in this conference to talk about it, but what we want to talk about in particular is how you can get better action at the local level, as the Secretary General was saying, and how you can actually make that work by getting the money and making sure that people at community level are heard, because often they know what to do. And on our panel, we have John Carter. He's been an MP for 24 years in New Zealand, and since 2008, he has been the Minister at the Civil Affairs Ministry, responsible for 3 tsunami warnings, and of course, sadly, the Christchurch earthquake on February the 22nd. I say sadly, but actually, it was quite amazing because nobody died in that earthquake. So, John Carter, welcome to you. The national state of emergency was just lifted, wasn't it, quite recently? Just about a week or so ago. Mm-hmm. Okay, and to my left here, we have Luo Ping-fei, who is the Vice Minister at the Civil Affairs Ministry in China, Beijing, and he has long been responsible for disaster relief and reduction in China. He is the Deputy Chair of the National Disaster Reduction Committee of China. Welcome to you, Vice Minister. Ni hao. I'm afraid that's the extent of my Mandarin Chinese, but there we go. Marcelo Ebrard is the Mayor of Mexico City, and congratulations to you, Marcelo, because last year you were awarded by the City Mayors Foundation the Best Mayor Award. Somebody I'm tipping for the top. The mayor has also worked in central government, so he has experience both at the local level and central government, because in the earlier part of this century, he worked in the central government. We also have to my left, in his splendid Senegalese costume, Abdou Sané, who's a member of Parliament, National Parliament in Senegal. He advises the Minister of Environment in Senegal, and he's also been very active in disaster risk reduction and mitigation. So welcome to you. Bonsoir. He says he doesn't speak very good English, but I think his English is better than my French, so let's see if we can persuade him to speak to us in English a little later. Sandra Wu, she is down there, and she heads the Kokusai Kogyo Group, which is a leading company in geospatial information consulting in Japan. And she is the first woman to lead a company that's been listed in the Tokyo Stock Exchange. When did that happen? Just happened. I have all the award winners on my panel today, don't I? Right. Dr. Robert Glasser is Secretary General of CARE International. He's at the end there. He's an Australian by origin, but he is now a citizen of the world because, of course, CARE International operates in 75 countries, and it's one of the biggest NGOs working in the humanitarian field, and he brings a great deal of experience at the theoretical level as well as in the field across many, many continents, both in poverty alleviation and in helping grassroots connect with leaders and also in disaster risk reduction. So, Robert, are you a doctor of medicine? Just a fancy PhD? Oh, all right. Okay, welcome to you. And also from Africa, from Zambia, we have Pastor Lawrence Tempfway, and he is Executive Director of Jubilee Center, and that's a Zambian Christian organization that mobilizes communities to alleviate poverty and also addresses the challenges of disaster risk reduction. So welcome to you. And last but not least is Prema Gopalan, and she is a founder of the wait for it, Society for the Promotion of Area Resources Centre. Thankfully, you give us an acronym, SPARK, based in Mumbai. And Prema works across continents again, and she leads the Huiron Commissioner's Global Campaign on Community Resilience. And this is a global coalition of grassroots women's organizations. So that is our panel. Welcome to you all. Thank you. And Prema, to make up for introducing you last, I'm going to ask you to kick off our discussions for us. Now, everybody talks about how local, think local. It's the big thing in the United Kingdom where I live. You know, the government there is saying localism is the big thing. Devolve what you can. And when it comes to disaster risk reduction, management, mitigation, why is Think Local so important, Prema, looking at your global experience, not obviously just from India?
Thank you, Zainab. I come here as a practitioner, having personally worked with hundreds of communities in 3 earthquakes and the tsunami in the last 10 years. Globally, we have a network of grassroots women's groups that has shown that where others see a problem, communities see the solutions. Grassroots women groups, when they partner with local governments, I think that's where the local action really begins. They are formal stakeholders on the table. We have to recognize that the first thing is that the poor are organized. They have the capacities, and they're handling risk at their level and building resilience in livelihoods, food security, and reconstruction. When we take this capacity as the CEPREDENAC, the Regional Authority for Disaster Management, has done in Central America, they invested in the capacities of grassroots groups and facilitated a linkage which met their goals to national governments. So in 6 countries, we have policy mandates which look at the grassroots as stakeholders. In India, more than 50 million women are part of self-help groups. So if we see it, it's very visible where the local action is and how governments, which have a mandate to protect citizens, need to seed citizenship and governance in no uncertain manner.
Okay, so in your mind, it's very, very easy. The local communities themselves know what needs to be done. They know where the problem lies. I mean, you visited Haiti, for instance, last year. Did the people in Haiti know what was going to happen or what should have been done on their behalf when they had the problems there?
I think the answer is in your question, that in Haiti, things are being done on behalf of people. Plans are being made which they are not informed of. But we saw a great hope and an untapped potential in the leadership of women in camps. They had restored the health services, they had restored the livelihoods, and with UN Habitat and other agencies, we are looking at including women in formal committees in the planning.
All
And
right.
that's the way forward.
Marcelo, Mayor of Mexico City, is it that straightforward that all you have to do is just go to the local communities when it comes to disaster risk mitigation, say to them, you define the problem for us, you know what needs to be done? Is it that straightforward?
I don't think so, because since my point of view, local authorities and local communities are a key issue in your strategy in order to prevent and to prepare the community in front of such an earthquake or flood. But it's not enough. You need professionals, you need technical support, you need financial support, and so you can have the team to prepare our city or your local community in front of an earthquake, for instance. But also another question, if you allow me, which is, what's the point of view of the local authorities, meaning mayors all over the world, about the support for them and about their voice and their proposals to the international community? So which is the most important risk that we are facing right now? Climate change. So we have a meeting past year in December in Mexico City with more than 1,000 cities. What's the feeling there? We don't have enough money, the national level or mainly community level, international community level, in order to accelerate the decisions and the measures.
You don't have the money. I mean, surely the money is there.
Money.
It's just it's not being used in the right way, some might say.
What?
Is the money not there, or is the money there, but
No,
it's not being
you
given
need
to the
more
right
money.
people?
You need more money in order to accelerate the measures that you should take. For instance, flooding, you need pipelines in order to increase your drainage capacities. Or in the climate change issue, you need more money in order to accelerate the change in the technologies in the public transportation facilities, for instance. So you need to have more weight of the local authorities in the international community. That's why it's so important, this meeting.
I've just been giving a correction here, yes. John Carter, and I'm going to ask you that, is that in the February earthquake in New Zealand, you did have 180 deaths, but it was in the November one, was it, that I was saying that? Oh, will you clarify that for us?
Well, the event was 4th of September, was
Yes.
the 7.1 earthquake, followed by an aftershock in Christchurch of 6.3. But it was immediately under the city, our second biggest city of Christchurch, and that is what caused the devastation and indeed caused the deaths of 180 people from countries around the world. And it resulted in the biggest ever disaster that New Zealand has ever experienced. And as a consequence, for the first time ever, we declared a state of national emergency. And the purpose of that was for us to be able to work alongside the Mayor of Christchurch, Bob Parker, using the national resources and indeed international resources to assist us to respond and to recover. And I guess the important thing that I want to say in this regard is that New Zealand for a long time has been building its civil defence structure, and it is based on firstly local government, then if necessary regional government, and where appropriate, as in this instance, on national government. But the important message and the thing where we focused and what I want to draw to the conference's attention is that while this was our biggest disaster in our second biggest city and where we had 180 deaths, within 3 weeks we had that city up and running again. And the people who came from around the world, the USAR teams for example, were commenting on the operation that we were running and telling us it was the slickest, smartest, most efficient operation they had seen. And the reason for it, and this is the message that I want to leave this conference, is because in New Zealand, our civil defence focuses on educating and preparing the people individually for their individual responsibility so that they know what they have to do when the disaster happens. And
So totally responsible at the local, not even the local level, but the individual level.
Indeed, Zainab, it is the individual responsibility that is crucial to our civil defence structure in New Zealand, and it worked. And
Right.
it worked, and that's the most important message that I would like to leave this conference.
Okay, thank you. And yes, just to clarify, September 2010, there were no casualties. Sorry, I meant to say September, but in February, of course, you did have those awful ones. Vice Minister Luo, perhaps you would give us your perspective on China. 2008, of course, there was the earthquake in Sichuan. How important is it for the Chinese government to see disaster risk reduction being carried out at the local level? How do you in central government ensure that people at the local level, local government, their voice is heard?
这个综合减灾呀，它不是一个单项的工作，应该是个系统工程。不但要资金投入，更需要方方面面的参与。因为资金投入是一个主要的，但是呢，这个其他方面的投入也一样，比如说减灾意识的形成公众，这方面嘛，就是只有让民众啊，就牢固树立那个防灾减灾的意识，实现从被动的救灾到主动减灾的这种转移，那么才能达到事半功倍的效果。第二个呢，协调组织协调机制的这种建立，那是更为重要的。也就是说，只有从中央到地方各级组织，那么都能够各尽其责，协同配合的联动机制建立起来之后，你才能有效保障咱们相关措施的落实。同时呢，也只有实现政府社会的这种协同配合，形成强大的合力，咱们也才能够保证减灾工作的高效运行，再一个基层减灾能力的建设。那么这些啊，既要注重专业人员的配备，更要重视社会力量的参与。既要注意，那么叫常抓减灾理念的这种灌输，同时还需要加强演练等等，这些啊都是需要加强的。所以至于减灾信息啊，那么就预警预报、隐患排查、会商制度，包括一些防范规划措施的建立等等，这些都是保证一线人员及时能得到信息，做好防范工作的一个非常重要的条件。谢谢。
Thank you very much indeed, Vice Minister. That was interesting, and we'll come back to you in a moment. But just staying with this idea of whether local is best, since we have our headphones on anyway, Abdusane, perhaps you'd give us your perspective from Senegal, for those of us who need the headphones in French. What's your view on this, and just how important it is for local authorities and communities to take the lead when it comes to identifying what needs to be done?
Merci, Madame la modérateur. Donc, au Sénégal, comme dans beaucoup de pays africains, nous sommes partis d'une situation et nous avons compris que, premièrement, non seulement il faut procéder désormais à une approche intégrée et concertée, mais il faut surtout, à travers la triptyque éducation, formation, sensibilisation, développer ce qu'on appelle la prévention, la culture de prévention des risques. C'est le meilleur remède pour les pays en voie de développement, parce que ce soit les rapports de la Banque mondiale, de l'Union européenne, un peu partout, on a montré que l'investissement dans la prévention permet d'atténuer des impacts catastrophiques qui peuvent se mesurer à l'échelle donc de plusieurs milliards de dollars. Donc, au Sénégal, ce matin, vous avez vu que le maire d'une des plus grandes villes du Sénégal était là. Le pouvoir local, comme le pouvoir national, ont compris que c'est dans le cadre d'une synergie d'action qu'ils peuvent atteindre un objectif qui est celui d'assurer aux populations sénégalaises beaucoup plus de sécurité, conformément à une disposition de notre Constitution qui dit que chez nous, la vie humaine est sacrée. Une chose est de le dire, une autre est de se donner les moyens pour réellement prendre cela en compte. Et c'est pourquoi donc, au niveau de l'Assemblée nationale, nous avons monté un réseau qui a pour mission de faire un plaidoyer. À côté de ce réseau, il y a un réseau de la société civile, il y a un réseau des universitaires dans le cadre de la recherche, il y a un réseau des femmes, leaders, et autour donc de la direction de la protection civile et de l'État central, et en harmonie avec les collectivités locales, nous avons pu asseoir aujourd'hui une politique qui est fondée sur la prévention et sur surtout la culture de prévention du risque.
Thank you. Robert, I mean, you work at a lot at grassroots level too. I mean, how do you ensure that you integrate risk reduction policies or programs within a sort of wider development framework? Because essentially that's what's got to be done, hasn't it? There's got to be that integrated approach.
It does need to be integrated, and it's challenging when you're dealing in a range of different operating contexts, because you've got, you know, everything ranging from failed states where there's no government in effect, or in fact in which a government is a belligerent, perceived as a belligerent, to vibrant countries with vibrant civil societies and active governments that are committed to working with civil societies, and everything in between. So it is quite challenging to integrate disaster risk reduction and development policies in those contexts. In one case, really, in the extreme case I mentioned, you're really working with local communities is the only option, and trying to decrease the vulnerability of those communities by providing alternative income sources, by seeding activities through community savings and loan projects and the like. In others, you really need to be working in both directions, both from the government policy level down and with civil society, so that civil society can demand the services from governments that governments should be providing, but also as part of the mechanism to implement the responses, because civil society, of course, has roots down to the village level. And so it's both a way of holding governments to account and a way of implementing solutions.
So it's not easy when you, as you say, working in countries where central government perhaps doesn't do what it does and where you don't have the accountability. With all respect to you, John Carter, not every country is New Zealand with a vibrant democracy, a small population of 4 million, and you accept, therefore, that it's much easier for a country like New Zealand to deal with disaster risk reduction than for the kind of countries that Care International might be working in.
Well, indeed, of course I do, and the system that we have in our country works for us, but it doesn't mean that it would necessarily work in every other country or in every other situation. And we're very happy to share what we have with the rest of the world at any time, but of course it is up to each country to then develop what suits them. The fact is that we have a system that works because we have one authority. In this case, when I declared the natural disaster, our Director General of Civil Defence, John Hamilton, became the commander, and that works for us. It may not necessarily work, as Robert has said, in every situation.
Sure. Pastor Lawrence, I mean, when you deal with your communities in Zambia and the grassroots communities and so on, and you do get help from NGOs and so on, do they come with a kind of disaster risk blueprint that they say there is a universal one-size-fits-all and we've seen it work in this or that country, or do they try to actually see that it's indigenized somehow?
We work very hard to make sure that whatever program at local level is happening is indigenized. I'll give you an example. I think first and foremost, we need to appreciate that the local people must not only be engaged, but they must also be listened to. Many times we do not listen to them. I'll give you an example where we had floods in an informal community where 40 houses were destroyed, one person died, and because of the floods, there was also a lot of challenge regarding cholera, but 5 people died. And a few months later, I went to the community and I said, what happened? Why did we not respond to this? And this is what the community said. The community leader said. He said, first, the people live in an informal community and they don't own title to the land where they have built a house, and so they don't take care of the house around or the surrounding around in terms of drain systems. Second, the community itself do not own that land. They do not participate in it because anytime they can be removed. And thirdly, the government had not put in infrastructures like roads and drain system and water, clean water. Then we began to engage them. 2010, 2011 rain season, we had the same rain pattern, but this time, because the people owned they owned the dream, what we saw was that there was no house was destroyed. What we saw was they had engaged local churches and international churches and other communities. 27 houses, brick houses were built because they had also engaged the local government. The local government had begun to give them plots and title to that plot. And people now were very proud. They were building brick houses. And I'm glad to report that this year, we did not have cholera because the government, the local government, civil society, business people, the local church, and the community came together and joined hands and worked together in that community. That community is becoming a powerful example of what happens when people join hands and work together. Very little resource was involved in doing all those activities.
So the universal principle you all think is that you have to listen to the locals when it comes to identifying what needs to be done in concrete terms, the guidelines that need to be done. Sandra, we've not heard from you on this. I mean, obviously the role of business is very important as one of the stakeholders when it comes to working in disaster risk reduction. But in terms of working at the community level, do you work quite closely with them?
Yes, we work very closely with the local government. Well, local government in Japan, actually, they already engage with the private sector in their DRR plans. Because in Japan, they have learned a lot from the past disaster. So the local level plans are so constantly and so highly developed. So I would say the disaster management is a business sector in its own right. So like our company, I think we are here to become an example and a demonstration, as a demo, how a private company like us has been heavily involved for like 64 years with those disaster prevention with the local and national governments. And many of you might wonder, probably local level planning at this scale can be only happen in the rich countries. But I would say no, because if local government, you are empowered to leverage the skills and the expertise of the private sector, if a set of guidelines were devised with the private sector participation to enable us to engage responsibly, I think it is possible everywhere. And I would say DRR at the local level is very advantageous to the community because strategies that are tailored for the specific regions, towns, and even neighborhoods, I would say they will achieve better local buy-in and therefore work much better in practice than the national and the standardized approach.
We heard Vice Minister Azuma earlier on talking about the reconstruction after the earthquake and tsunami in Japan. I mean, and clearly there's a great deal of debate now about not only rebuilding, but building much, much better. Insofar as you can tell, do you feel that local communities are very heavily involved in that process?
I would say not just only happy to involve, they feel that want their voice to be heard by the national level. So all the stakeholders, I would say, in the community. They would like to involve to building the better future of the community.
John?
Zainab, if I can just add to that, in our country, our civil defence system wouldn't work without the involvement of the private sector. And when a disaster emergency is called, whether it be local or regional or national, part of the response is including and building in the private sector so that they play their part. They are a fundamental part to the whole of the recovery. And that's what's important for us. Is the whole objective is to try and get things back to normality as quickly as you can. Having the school children go back to school so parents can go back to work is a really important part of the recovery, as part of the response and part of the recovery. Having business continuity is a fundamental part of the whole of the response. And it's part of your readiness, it's part of the thing that we should be doing, talking about, thinking about, as we develop our civil defence system, wherever it is. Having both individuals, communities and business working together makes us go forward. If we don't include all those, then quite honestly we're going to fail.
But I mean, when you look at Japan, I mean, ask this question, because you see now how a lot of the schools, you say, get the kids back to school, but we see that in Japan, a lot of the schools are still being used as evacuation centres, and that return to normalcy hasn't happened as quickly as people would like. But do you think that it's a bit of a counsel of despair when people look at what happened in Japan and you say, well, even if a country as advanced technologically as this could not manage to prevent the terrible tragedy, that actually there are just times when, however well prepared you might be, you just can't manage it all? I mean, does anybody have a view on that, that actually there are limits to what you can do sometimes?
Well, look, I'm happy to respond. I don't want to dominate the panel, but of course the fact is, of course, you can't prevent disasters. They're going to happen. It's a fact of life. It's a fact of nature. What is important is to be as prepared as you can before they happen, and then have a system that responds as rapidly as possible after. And so making sure that you're planning, as I know has been done in Japan and many other nations, to get that normalcy as quickly as possible. As Marcelo has said, getting businesses together, making sure your community's ready to work is all part of the package. It's the planning that matters before that will get you through after. And I think all these things that the panel is talking about is fundamental to the way in which we approach civil defence. Involving individuals is crucial. Having businesses involved is just a necessity. Having the communities, the schools, all those things make it work for you. You can't prevent it, you certainly can respond to it.
Yes, I agree with John. We were talking about 85 experience in Mexico City. We have an earthquake, terrible one, 250,000 people affected by the time. And more recently, the influenza case in 2009, we stopped the city, the economic activities, all the economy of the city. So everything depends on what kind of planning do you have in place.
Absolutely.
And what kind of involvement do you have from the society, the private sector, but also all the society. For instance, in 2009, we didn't know what kind of virus we were facing, if it's lethal or not. So we stopped the city in 48 hours, stopped all the activities with the support of the people, without coercion. So this is the key of any civil protection plan that you can put in place in anywhere.
Can I just come in on this as well? Marcelo, I agree with you and John as well. I mean, there is something about, are there some emergencies we can't respond to because the scale or we're just unprepared? The answer is yes, we've seen it. We've also seen in countries that have had frequent disasters, very effective responses. Bangladesh is a great example where you had tens of thousands of people died, and then as a result of coordinated effort with NGOs, with the private sector, with government, a subsequent cyclone in which there were very few people who died. So the real challenge is in places that haven't experienced big disasters in a long time. In those places, it's perfectly reasonable for a government not to spend more of its money on disaster risk reduction. They've got malaria. They've got people dying, of hunger. There's no food security. And it's a perfectly rational decision for the government to say, I've got this amount of money. I've got competing demands from all over the place. We don't suffer emergencies frequently. I'm going to spend it on something else. So I think there is this issue about how often countries experience emergencies. And of course, with climate change, we could see many more countries experiencing big emergencies that haven't experienced them before.
I would like to alert that the crises are different now. Food security is a crisis, and to avoid this, these are not sudden crises. They really build up due to conditions of drought and so on. In Guatemala, India, and Kenya, over 10,000 women, funded by a seed fund, the Community Resilience Fund, which has shown that you need flexible funding. It's not a question of more money, it's a question of how money is used to invest in local capacities, to invest in governance structures, and to incentivize both local communities and local governments to look at the problem squarely and find solutions at that level. So what I'm emphasizing is that the grassroots work in many of our countries is making communities aware of their risk. They're taking action on it, but the most important thing which is missing is they are not on the table as the plans are made.
I mean, you all seem to be saying local is good, but what I want to ask you now is local is good, but who pays for it? So who does pay for it? Sandra? Is it just the private sector mostly, or working with government? And so who pays for it?
Well, take Japan's case, for example, because Japan is really heavily have a budget for those disaster prevention. So they will have, those subsidies will come from the national level, go to the local government. And they will encourage local government in implementing such kind of activities. And it will also encourage the local level action as well. But I would say that because people would say this is a business sector, but let's see what happened when those disaster strikes. Well, let's say the afternoon of the the East Japan earthquake. Like our company, we immediately mobilize our resources to collect and analyze those geospatial information and the computer models. And through our website to those organizations and the local government to implement those recovery immediately. So I would say engaging those private sector to those BRR plan. At the same time, for the private sector can have a lot to offer back to the community as well.
Marcelo, do you think there's a problem with, how do you at local level get the money that you need to implement what you want, the flood tunnels and that kind of thing?
Remember nightmares in the local offices. Well, mainly in the case of Mexico City, we increased past years, 300% or more, the investment in risk management and prevention. But the issue here is you can reach and look for money in the national level. We have the support of the federal government, but it's not enough. When you are thinking in a global risk, no local ones. For instance, Mexico is an earthquake zone, which is very local if you want. But what about climate change all over the world? Changing the climate of the world. And we know that we are facing new risks, mainly about rain patterns in our city, in the next years. So we are going to invest in the local level with our money, more than $3 billion, in order to reduce the risks of the city against climate change. But it's not going to be enough. You need a global initiative in order to reach new agreements and stop the climate change on time, because otherwise all the cities all over the world are going to face a real change in the risk that you are managed in your city. So you need to collect money of the international community in order to support the local authorities' initiatives. Maybe this can be in the next years, but today it's really difficult to get money from the international architecture, financial one, in order to support your efforts in the local level in order to face the risks.
And that really undermines your ability to manage DIR. Yeah, sure. And then I wanted to, actually, can I just very quickly ask Vice Minister Luo something, and then I'll come to you, Abdou, because in 2008, as we said, a big earthquake in Sichuan, and the investment made by the central government over 3 years was announced to be around $146 billion to rebuild the damaged areas. How did you manage to channel that national money locally?
汶川地震咱们恢复重建3年，总共国家投入10205亿人民币。这些资金呢，如何投入地方，如何进行管理？那么主要分为4个层次。一个是中央直接投资，那么由中央财政直接拨付到相关的省市，这是一个层次。第二个层次，那么就我们动员了全国的19个省市区对口援建灾区的一些重灾的县市，那么这个对口支援的资金呢，就直接由各省区带入援建项目组织实施的第二个层次。第三呢，就是社会捐赠部分，那么就根据捐赠者的意愿，然后直接用于灾区的恢复重建。第四一个层次就是地方各级自己筹措的资金，那么就是根据自己的实际情况用于项目建设，这样的这个层次拨付款项。
Does anybody want to put a point to Vice Minister Luo from our panel here? You want to?
Yes. I just wanted to say that you're talking about money and where are the resources, who's going to pay for this. I wanted to add that we had a very good story today from the president of Macedonia, former president of Macedonia, who talked about Noah, how he prepared for the flood. And I think it's important that as we do these frameworks and actions we put in place, we begin to prepare people where we're in advance. Even if there's no money, it is important that the local people, again, are engaged, are being told about what is happening at this high level, so that local people begin to understand that there are these situations that can happen to them, and they begin to prepare so that in a case a disaster came, definitely the challenges will be much fewer compared to people who are not prepared. So I would encourage that.
Thank you. Abdou Sane, so you want to ask you, I mean, what point you want to make, but also how do you yourself make sure in the National Parliament that local authorities have the right budget and resources to implement their DRR measures?
Voilà, donc il y a ce qu'on appelle la volonté politique. Lorsqu'elle s'exprime, vous arrivez à trouver des ressources. Je vous donne donc des exemples. Lorsqu'il y a eu des inondations dans les années 2005-2006, sur fonds propres, nous avons pu dégager 52 milliards de francs CFA pour construire des maisons et reloger les sinistrés. Ça s'appelle le plan Diakhaï. Donc 52 milliards de francs CFA, un franc CFA c'est 655 francs, c'est 655 euros. Deuxièmement, avec toujours cette même volonté politique, nous sommes un peu coquillés et compte tenu des effets prévisibles des changements climatiques, nous avons calculé qu'avec le relèvement éventuel des eaux de mer, le Sénégal risque d'être envahi en bonne partie par les eaux. Donc il fallait faire face à cette érosion côtière. Là aussi, nous avons entrepris actuellement, dans le cadre d'une approche sous-régionale, un programme de protection du littoral à travers donc, la lutte contre l'érosion et qui se chiffre l'unité par mètre. Le mètre, c'est 1 million de francs CFA. Et Dieu merci, avec le partenariat et le soutien des institutions telles que l'UEMOA, ce programme est en train donc d'être conduit. Enfin, l'autre fléau qui est la sécheresse, nous avons trouvé 2 solutions. Une solution à court terme et une solution à long terme. La solution à court terme s'est traduite par l'organisation et la création de plusieurs bassins de rétention qui fonctionnent à merveille aujourd'hui et qui permettent à des gens qui étaient sur le continent d'accéder à l'eau et donc de contourner les conséquences liées à la sécheresse. Enfin, il y a la Grande Muraille Verte qui, elle, a une approche panafricaine qui va donc du Sénégal jusqu'au bout de l'Afrique de l'Est. Et elle aussi, elle est financée pour le moment sur budget propre. C'est parce que l'exécutif comme le législatif, en rapport avec le local, tout le monde a compris que la finalité de l'existence d'une société humaine, c'est d'abord la vie et le bonheur de ces hommes. Donc, quand vous partez avec ce principe sacro-saint, forcément, vous trouverez les moyens propres à vous et en ce moment, les partenaires extérieurs seront mieux engagés à vous appuyer. C'est ça le secret dans la stratégie de réussite et de protection des populations au Sénégal.
Thank you.
Can I just comment once on this?
Yeah, and in fact, actually, Robert, I tell you what you could do, because obviously our session was slightly truncated because the previous one ran over, is that just come to the panelists now, all of you in turn, incorporating anything you've heard. But, you know, you all come with a great deal of experience from various perspectives. What is your message to the delegates here who are obviously talking about this? I mean, if you want to set out priorities, what is your final message? And we start with you, Robert.
Thanks, Annette. Well, the first obvious point is there aren't enough resources to manage the scale of the problem we're confronting with climate change and demographic change as well. That even if governments, in their budget allocation process, were listening to the voices of the poor and marginalized and allocating budgets accordingly to meet this problem, it wouldn't be enough. Even if relying on aid, that won't be enough. Aid is generally just a few percentages of GNP in most countries. There's not enough aid out there to meet the disaster risk reduction needs and challenges, and virtually every country delegation here has a national development plan, probably with a huge funding gap for that reason. So the only way we're going to deal with this problem is if we get very clever and very innovative. And let me give you one example of a small initiative that is doing this by mobilizing the private sector, in essence mobilizing the profit motive, the longer-term profit motive. So CARE is working with Allianz Insurance to develop in India and has been working with them to develop a micro-insurance product. Now that's a loss leader for Allianz. They're not making money on that yet, but they're developing a future market. But in the meantime, there are literally millions of people who now have insurance, micro-insurance. These are poor people living below the poverty line who now have a micro-insurance product that's decreasing vulnerability. It's just one example. Second is working with women, empowering women and girls and channeling investments to focus on women. Because not only are women disproportionately affected by these crises, but they play a disproportionately positive role in lifting their communities out of poverty, in using the money they earn to help their families and help their communities. Those are the key messages I would leave.
He's pinched one of your last messages, hasn't he, Prema? The women one. But I'll come to you. By then, we might need it refreshed, that argument. Marcelo.
Well, to propose, we should change the financial worldwide architecture in order to support the prevention efforts all over the world, mainly in the local level, accelerate the prevention measures because the international community is investing more in reaction than in prevention. Secondly, to increase and support the United Nations initiative in order to share the lessons that we have learned from several countries all over the world in order to prevent new disasters. And third, to say that the global main risk that I can see is climate change. We are going in a very slow motion about the new objectives that we need to reach in the short term. So I think that we should increase and accelerate the agreement in order to supply a new agreement about climate change. And in the short term, we can support the local authorities and investments in order to reduce the origins of the climate change all over the world. It's a main risk, and we should take seriously this risk for the next generation. Thank you very much.
Well, I think that's a key factor of this global platform meetings. I would say, like what Japan's recent disaster proved one thing, is that the best DRR can still fail without the awareness at the individual level, as John just mentioned. It also proved that soft approach, such as like innovative education work, are actually more cost-effective than hard infrastructure. Well, in the recent disaster, in one city, Kamaishi, where all those approaches were followed correctly, 99.8% school children survived because they didn't assume those infrastructure would protect them 100%. And what is safe on the hazard map will be safe in all disasters. So we evacuated immediately. Well, like Japan's DR strategy included educational components, which is like making the risk assessment and also maintaining risk awareness and also educating the people how to apply their situational decision-making abilities. And I would say those education activity will be more effective and more flexible done at the local level as well. And I would have some message I would like to share with all of you, which is the experience in Japan and experience as a private company is. One, engage the private sector with a seat at the table when you're designing your DR framework. Two, take advantage of private sector's skill and expertise. Three, realize that private companies have a lot to offer to the community we serve, both for profit and when necessary, not for profit.
Thank you. John?
Zainab, the biggest gift that we can give to humanity is saving a life or lives. And while it's important that we focus on infrastructure, while it's important that we ensure that we have research and technology, and while it's important that we have used the services of both government and private sector when we are involved in an event, the other component that I still don't think we do enough about is educating and preparing our people at an individual level, making them aware of their responsibilities. And once you do that, and they are prepared, and they are educated, and they do know how to respond, you will save lives. And to me, that is the biggest message that I can leave. The better we educate, the more lives we're going to save, and that surely is part of the humanitarian service that we're here to provide.
Thank you. Vice Minister Luo, your brief final message, and very briefly from the rest of the panels afterwards.
这个听了各位的发言，所以很受启发，也获益良多。尽管我们的情况不一样，减灾救灾的进度也各不相同，但是我感到有一个是共同的，那就是加强基层的减灾能力建设，都是我们所共同需要的。因为我们的减灾目标要靠基层去实现。我们减灾的效益或者叫成效，也取决于基层减灾能力的强和弱。 我们减灾的可持续发展，也看我们目前的基层的减灾的基础。因此啊，我们感觉到，大会应该更加的关注加强基层社区减灾能力的建设，更加的关注把更多的资源用于基层的减灾救灾事业，更多的关注我们共同的如何共同的来推进减灾事业的发展，加强合作与交流。所以这个是我们所关心的，因为中国是一个灾害频发的国家，不但灾种多，发生频率很高，灾害损失也很重，所以中国政府历来重视减灾救灾工作。我们也希望在国际领域更多的加强合作与交流，共同来面对自然灾害这个共同的挑战，和推动我们人类经济社会的可持续发展。谢谢。
Thank you. Thank you. And briefly, Abdusane, and your final comment, just briefly, please. Thank you. Oh, no, Abdusane, sorry. We're just going down. There's logic. In order.
Pour renforcer la coopération internationale, je crois qu'il faut qu'on essaie de voir davantage les critères d'éligibilité pour l'accès aux ressources et au soutien de la communauté internationale. Vous prenez un pays comme le Sénégal, qui est un pays sahélien, qui n'a pas de ressources, qui n'a ni pétrole, ni mine, mais qui est engagé dans la volonté résolue de prendre en compte la vie des Sénégalaises et des Sénégalais, s'efforce à chaque fois de puiser sur son propre budget et d'engager des programmes très ambitieux qui font qu'aujourd'hui, on ne cite pas le Sénégal parmi les pays qui enregistrent un nombre de victimes élevé, malgré un contexte favorable aujourd'hui à toute forme de crise. Donc pour un tel pays, lorsqu'il soumet une requête, on ne doit pas le traiter de la même façon qu'on aurait traité un autre pays qui a le potentiel, mais qui peut-être a l'absence de vision et l'absence de politique. Okay. C'est pourquoi donc je formule cet appel à l'endroit de la communauté internationale, de la Banque mondiale qui a pris en charge cette organisation et des autres acteurs pour qu'on accorde davantage, beaucoup plus de mérite à ce genre de pays qui sont un pays de référence. Je vous remercie.
Thank you. Very briefly, Prema, and then very briefly, Lawrence. Please, as quickly as you can. Thank you.
I have two key messages: that the practice around building resilience, which incorporates DRR and climate change adaptation, is new and very recent. So I would really appeal to everyone here, including the governments, that top-down delivery mechanisms are not going to work. We need to move away from business as usual, and we need to reach the resources very directly, as in the example of many countries as shown. These resources need to allow communities to adapt their plans and priorities, as we've done in the case of Guatemala, where 6 ministries, including the environment, food, and disaster management authorities, combined their resources, and that allowed communities to perform. The Community Practitioners Platform is a global arrangement. It is a network of champions that has been mandated by the ISTR. So we have the voice of communities in these platforms. And my appeal is that we get governments, international agencies which have signed up to global agreements around the HFA and MDG to invest in formal platforms which mandate the roles of communities to take lead in local action.
Got to leave it there because we're running out of time. Final rousing message to take us to the end, please.
The Zambian government has identified mindset shift as one of the 5 biggest challenges to building resilience at the local level. And I think my message to us today is that the civil society need to do more in empowering the local community to have a voice on issues that concern them. our government are more likely to listen to the local people than to the civil societies. When local people are mobilized and are able to express their needs, our governments are more likely to listen. And so that is what we need to do here. The last point is we must celebrate the good things that are happening. We are not here because it's a hopeless situation. We are here because there is hope.
Great, I knew it was the right thing.
Do a bit of dancing.
We're with that. We're with you on that. Good.
To do this work.
I knew that smile on your face would end on a high note, onwards and upwards. Thank you very much indeed, panel, for discussing Investor Day for a Safer Tomorrow, increasing investment for local action. May I ask the Deputy Secretary General, thank you very much for sitting here with us, and you have some remarks, I think, for the global platform.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ms. Badawi, for your moderation, and thanks to all the panelists. I think there are a few remaining challenges that have been mentioned here. We have seen that this plenary has put the spotlight on the front line of implementation of disaster risk reduction in government, yes, but more so at the local level, and highlighted the role of local communities. It is at this administrative level that the main decisions are taken that will influence the risk of future disasters. So we have to invest more. We have to empower local communities. The challenge remains to ensure that with the decentralization of responsibilities, the human and financial resources are also made available. And we have heard here that these are indeed available. We need to give more information. We need to empower communities, and we need to have an integrated approach in dealing with disaster risk reduction. As far as recommendations are concerned, I think in line with the theme of the global platform, namely the need to increase investment in local action, we need definitely local authorities. We need more mayors to engage and to commit to disaster resilience at the local level. So we hope that by the next global platform, the number of mayors who have committed to the ISDR campaign will need to have increased considerably, but we'll also need to have the right tools to assist in the fulfillment of the commitment they're making to their constituents, or the engagement will fizzle out. We have also seen an emphasis on the participation, involvement of civil society, business communities. This is important. And we shall also need to collectively change our engagement on disaster risk reduction. We heard that integrated approaches, as I said before, are required with governments, local actors, and the private sector, but also key lies in the planning. Planning when we have put in place development plans, definitely, but also with the civil society and the business communities. They will all have to build this in as part of their activities. So this is basically what has come out of this plenary. I would like once again to thank you, Ms. Badawi, to thank our panelists here. Our next session in this conference room will start shortly. We are running out of time, and at the time we will hear statements from member states. So the plenary is now closed. Thank you very much.